Welcome back, friends, to our next couple chapters of My Teacher is an Alien. I'm joined by Big Bear, Polly, and Baby Soren over there to listen to chapters 15 and 16. So if you haven't already, grab a comfy spot, grab a drink if you need one, and let's get into My Teacher is an Alien, chapters 15 and 16. Chapter 15, Hooky for 3. I was so nervous that I didn't even look at Mr. Smith when it was time to leave for my lesson. Forgive me, Mr. Bamwick, I thought as I headed away from his room toward the side door. Peeking out to make sure there was no one around, I sprinted to my bike, unlocked it, and headed out of the schoolyard as fast as I could. Duncan was waiting at the corner of Pine and Parker, sitting on a blue 5-speed. Follow me, I said, and kept riding for the edge of town. I checked my watch. It had been 12 minutes since I left class. If I could make it back just as fast, that would give me 16 minutes to take the pictures. Peter was waiting in front of the hedge at Broxholm's house. I could see his smile quickly turn to a frown when he saw who was with me. His face turned pale, even as we drew up. What's he doing here? Demanded Peter. I was impressed. It took a lot of nerve for Peter to say that in front of Duncan. To my surprise, it was Duncan who tried to make peace. I just came to help, he said. He did say it kind of belligerently, but he was holding up his hands with the palms to show that he meant peace. He's going to be our lookout, I added, hoping that Peter would see the wisdom in this. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Okay, he said grudgingly. I guess you can stay. Duncan looked as pleased as a naughty puppy who's just been let back into the house. What do you want me to do? He asked. Stand right here, I said, indicating a spot just inside the hedge where he could have a good view of the sidewalk. If you see Mr. Smith coming, run up on the porch and pound on the door to give us a warning, then run for your life. Duncan nodded seriously and took his place. I looked at Peter. He gave me a nod, and we headed for the back of the house. To my relief, the broken lock was still where Peter had jammed it back in place after our last adventure here. I had figured that as a temporary tenant, Broxholm probably wouldn't keep that close of an eye on things that needed repair around the place. It was nice to find out I had been right. We opened the door and headed back into the alien's lair. I felt a little more at ease this time. After all, we could be pretty sure that Broxholm wouldn't stay at school. We knew exactly where we were going, and we had a lookout to keep us from being surprised. How could we go wrong? The answer to that question was even worse than I expected. For the first few minutes, everything went as smooth as could be. We made it out of the cellar and into the attic with time to spare. Nothing had changed. The column of blue light was still there, and poor Miss Swartz was still trapped right in the middle of it. I rushed over to it and placed my hands against the force field. Almost instantly, I could hear Miss Swartz's voice in my head. Hello, Susan. What are you doing here? We came to take some pictures of you so that we can prove what's going on, I thought back at her. Her reply scared me. Weren't you just here a few minutes ago? She asked. She sounded confused. I bit my lip. Was she all right? Of course, since the thought was about her, Miss Swartz picked it up. I'm not sure, she responded. It's getting so it's very hard to think in here. She paused for a moment, then asked, What day is this? It's Tuesday, I thought. Tuesday, the 24th of May. Her reaction almost knocked me over. You must do something, she thought desperately. It's only 2 days until Broxholm is planning his pickup, Susan. You have to do something. I know, I replied. Her fear was coming through as clearly as her thoughts, and it was making me afraid too. Our conversation was interrupted by Peter. Susan, we can't just stand here and chat. We've got to get these pictures taken. He was right, of course. Hang on, Miss Swartz, I thought. We'll get you out of there somehow. Peter had already started flashing. That's good, he said. Let me get a couple more of you standing next to her, then move away from the force field so I can get some of Miss Swartz by herself. I was glad Peter was there. I might have gotten so wound up in talking to Miss Swartz that I wouldn't have even taken the pictures in time to get back to school, but he was working fast. In a few minutes, he had used up most of the roll, taking some pictures with flashes, some without, working from all different angles. I helped, and we did everything we could to think of to make sure we did get at least one good shot. We were just trying to figure out the last angle when we heard a terrible scream from downstairs. Ah! I couldn't make much sense of the words, but I recognized the voice. It belonged to Duncan Dougal. Chapter 16, Duncan's Disaster. Peter looked at me. I looked at him. I wondered if he was as terrified as he looked. I wondered if I looked as terrified as I felt. "What's he doing in here?" I whispered. "And what's happening to him?" hissed Peter. "And what are we going to do about it?" I thought. We hesitated for only a second, and then began to creep down the stairwell. Duncan was still screaming. We had left the door to the attic open, in case we needed to make a quick getaway. Poking my head around the edge, I looked in the direction of their screams. They were coming from the room where Mr. Smith sat to take off his mask every night. I reached for Peter's hand. "What should we do?" I mouthed to him. He pointed down the hall and started off with me, following close behind. After a couple of steps, we dropped to our bellies and slid up to the door and peeked around the edge. I couldn't believe it. Duncan was all alone. He was standing in front of the mirror, screaming for all he was worth. I can't say that I blamed him. The communicator was on, and Duncan was looking into the bridge of Broxholm Starship, and one of those hideous aliens from the ship was looking back at him, talking to him in that language of growls and shrieks. I took a deep breath and slithered into the room, crawling across the floor as fast as I could move. I scooted right under the table and hit the switch I had seen Broxholm use to turn the set off. It made a cracking noise and then fell silent. Duncan stopped screaming. "You idiot!" yelled Peter, jumping into the room. "What are you doing in here?" I got bored," sniffled Duncan. Talk about a short attention span. He couldn't have been out there for more than 5 or 10 minutes. "And I wanted to see if you were telling the truth or not," he continued. "So I went around the house and came in through the cellar. This was the only room with anything in it, so I came in. When I touched the switch, that thing showed up and started growling at me." Duncan was blubbering by now, with big tears cutting clean paths down his dirty face. He turned to me and said, "Is that what Mr. Smith really looks like?" I nodded my head. Duncan's eyes rolled back in his head, and he fainted. By the time we got him on his feet and out of the house, I only had 10 minutes to get back to school. "Maybe I shouldn't go back," I said. Peter shook his head. "You have to," he said. "We can't afford to be more suspicious than we already are. Anyway, I don't think the aliens actually saw you. At least not your face. You stayed down low enough." "What about me?" blubbered Duncan. "What about me?" Peter hesitated. "You'll have to hide out at my house," he said. "It's the last place anyone would think to look for you. If you stay there, you may be safe. Get going, Susan. You've got to get back to school as soon as possible. Don't worry about the pictures. I'll take care of that. Just move!" I hopped on my bike and headed for school. By riding extra hard, I got there just about the time my lesson was supposed to be ending. But I was all hot and sweaty when I sneaked back in. Even worse, I ran into Mr. Bamwick the moment I walked through the door. He was furious. "Susan, where have you been?" he shouted. "I've spent the last 40 minutes waiting for you. We've got a concert in 2 days, and my star soloist can't even show up for her lesson?" I did the only thing I could think of. I started to cry. It wasn't hard to do, since I was on the edge of tears anyway. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bamwick," I sobbed. "I'm just so frightened I couldn't come to my lesson." Wow, so far so good. I was actually managing to tell him something that was pretty close to the truth. But then I felt bad because Mr. Bamwick, who really is a good guy, got upset about scaring me and started apologizing for putting me under so much pressure. In the end, it worked out better than I could have imagined. Mr. Bamwick went to Mr. Smith and explained there had been a problem with my lesson, and since we had this important concert coming up, would it be possible for him to keep me a little while longer, and so on. It was great. I had a real excuse, and I even got to work on my solo. Back in class, things were pretty quiet until just before the end of the day when Mike Foran started throwing spitballs at Stacy. I wondered if the two of them weren't actually enjoying themselves. After all, they had been so well behaved for the last several years that maybe this was the perfect chance for them to let off a little steam. But it wasn't Stacy and Michael who asked to stay after school that day. No, that honor was deserved for yours truly. I was sitting at my desk, thinking that maybe we had actually gotten away with our little photo session, when Mr. Smith walked up to me and said, "Miss Simmons, I want you to stay after school. I need to talk to you." It was amazing how two such simple sentences could teach me whole new levels of fear. I wonder what Mr. Smith/Broxholm wants to talk to Susan about. I guess we'll have to tune in to the next 2 chapters to find out. Anyway, this was chapters 15 and 16 of My Teacher is an Alien. For Mr. Lures, Polly, Big Bear, and Baby Soren, we'll see you next time. Have a good day, friends.